The Campaign for Democracy is the most extraordinary campaign this country's ever known. But how did it come about, and who's behind it? Hello, my name's Graham MacArthur, and I'm the founder of the Campaign for Democracy. I'm the one who put the ideas together that it's based on. The campaign started with a question, but it wasn't the usual question, how do you get power, and what do you do with it once you've got it? My question was, how did it get to be where it is today? It was no great quest, it was no great search for truth. It was just a curiosity. I'd always been interested in history, so I had a small collection of history books, and it was reading through one of these that I came across two phrases. One of the phrases was the grant of supply, and the other one was the redress of grievances. It used to be that the king had all the power, and Parliament had all the money. So if the king wanted some money for a war or something, he had to go to Parliament and ask for it. In return for the grant of supply, the money, the people would ask for the redress of their grievances, help from the king in sorting some of the problems out. So what it came down to was a deal. Everything was an exchange. And what happened in the end, and this is a gross oversimplification, is that Parliament ended up with all the power and all the money. Reading those two phrases, I made a connection. What if those floating voters were to make a deal with Parliament? What if they wanted their grievances redressed in return for that supply of votes in those key marginals? What sort of deal could we make? What sort of thing would unite everybody behind us? What would be worth demanding? Those are the questions in my head. But the first question that had to be answered was just how many people actually decided the outcome of British general elections. I thought it might be 250,000, it might be 100,000. Quite a few, even though the system was very unfair. I started putting these ideas together back in 1994, and John Major had just won his election in 1992. So I started looking at the numbers involved. Well, it turned out he'd won a 21-seat majority. If he'd lost 11 of those seats, no majority. In those 11 seats, he won by 1,300 votes. 1,300 people, ordinary people, floating voters in key marginals, decided who won that election. At the next general election, 44 million of us will be allowed to vote. Probably around 27 million of us will. But not more than 12,000 people will decide who wins the next British general election. Whichever way it goes, whether it's going towards Labour or Conservative or stuck in the middle, you can decide the outcome with the votes of 12,000 ordinary people, floating voters, in key marginals. The next question was, if those floating voters were to make a demand, what demand could they make that would unite a whole nation behind them? Well, back in those days, there were lots of organisations campaigning for political reform, organisations like Charter 88, and they were campaigning for things like a written constitution and a Bill of Rights. But I realised that wasn't enough, it had to be something absolutely fundamental. And in the end it came down to one thing, sovereignty. At the moment, Parliament decides the rules for us, but it also decides the rules for itself. Parliament decides how we're governed. That is wrong. Sovereignty had to be transferred to the British people. At first I was thinking in terms of a constitutional commission. We would take our proposals for political reform to the commission. If they supported them, they would push those proposals forward to Parliament. If Parliament rejected them, they would go to referendum, and the referendum process would break parliamentary sovereignty. That was absolutely vital. I realised we could use these processes to demand referendums on any issue, but I shied away from that. I thought it would lead to chaos, too many demands, unreasonable demands from too many people. The system would be unworkable. And then I found out about Switzerland. In Switzerland, any 7 ordinary citizens can go to the government and say, we want a referendum on our proposal. And the government says, OK, off you go. You've got 18 months to collect 100,000 signatures from your fellow citizens. If you can do that, then you come back to us. They go off, they collect the signatures, they go back to the government says, OK, it's a good idea, we'll put it forward for you anyway. Or they negotiate, they compromise, and they put that modified proposal through. But the bottom line is, if government and people can't reach agreement, it must go to referendum. The people are sovereign, the people decide. That works at every level in Switzerland. It works at the federal level, it works at the regional level, it works at the county level, it works at the town level. If something doesn't work, they have the power to fix it. In this country, we can't do anything like that. What it means is that people in Switzerland work much more closely with their politicians than we do in this country. The political system in our country was designed to work in the interests of parties and their supporters, their financial supporters. That has to change. It has to work in the interest of the people of this country. What's interesting is when we talk to party members, party workers, candidates, members of parliament, they can all see the sense in this. They all understand that the political system doesn't work as we need it to work. And they also understand that we're not working against them. They see that it's in their interests. They can see that they need these systems as much as we do. We're working against systems, not people, and that's why they can support us. The reason why we campaign for a process rather than an outcome, say like proportional representation, is that we can get people behind the process. If we were to include a demand for proportional representation, a lot of people would quite rightly say, well, actually we don't want that. We don't want that imposed on us in that way. And they'd be quite correct. So, for example, if you do want to campaign for proportional representation, what you do is you can campaign for it either through the referendum process or through the Constitutional Commission. Either way, the people of this country will decide whether or not you get that, but it will be up to them, not you. The campaign for democracy isn't some esoteric campaign about political reform. It's about actually solving problems on the ground. We know what the problems are. We know what the solutions are. What we don't have is a political system that gets us from the problems to the solutions. And that has to change. That has to change very quickly. If we're going to solve the problems we face, first of all, we've got to change the political system. That's what this campaign is about.